And we're privileged that you've taken the time out a lot of days to come and speak to us and to bring us to this place. So thank you, Matan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. There we go. I know many speakers, when they start talking to an audience, they say they're happy to be here, they're excited to be here, but I hope you know this is from the bottom of my heart. This is the second time I'm here. I'm really, really happy to be here. That's, first of all. Happy to be back in a community that I have many shared values with, a community that I respect very much, that I've learned to love in the past few months. I've been following many of you from far. I saw Keith argues with my politics on Facebook, so it means we're good friends. And you know, I have my adopted parents here, Jill and Ed, and I have and Keith, who picks me up every time, and everybody who organized this conference. Thank you so much. I have to say to Mike, who's really a courageous theologist and also an intellect, he really is. It's a privilege not only to listen to him and agree with him, it's even more of a privilege, and I think that symbolizes friendship. It's more of a privilege to argue with him. And I say that from the bottom of my heart, and it shows, I think, real friendship between us, and you're a courageous man, so thank you for having me. Today, I want to take you to the center of one of Israel's most complicated borders. A border that has brought enemies and complexities throughout the ages, from the days of the Bible till these days, till these times. A complicated border that symbolizes much of what Israel is struggling for, but my main thesis to you today will be that it's not only what Israel is struggling for, it's what the culture that we want to live in is struggling for. We're going to try, and I'm going to try to explore with you a little bit of what's happening in Israel's southern border, in the Gaza Strip, and hopefully try to come out with a few conclusions, very hard and complicated conclusions in a very, very complicated region of what's happening in the Gaza Strip these days. The dilemma that Israel is facing is a dilemma that we call now the Kite Dilemma. What do you do against an enemy that really your only desire is to live in peace with him? No Israeli mother or father, believe me, returned to the homeland after 2,000 years aspiring to go to war. On the contrary, we return to plow fields, to revive a culture, to revive a language, to return to the center of the world and to our civilization. But when you are faced by enemies, and I'm going to quote one of Israel's most vicious enemies, Hassan Nasrallah from Lebanon, in a famous speech in the year 2000, as Israel withdrew its troops from Lebanon, he said, "We caught Israel in a web." What did he mean by that? See, Nasrallah studied the Israeli society and studied the Israeli public and the genetics that defined it. What are the elements, the psychological elements that define that society? And he came to a conclusion. The difference between the enemies of Israel and Israel is that they sanctify death. That's why war is so easy for them. And we sanctify life. That's why war is so hard for us. A little words, if you will, if I may, about myself. If whoever doesn't know, whoever is new here, my name is Matan Dansker. I'm 25 years old. I was born in Jerusalem. A few years after I was born, when I was 2 years old, I don't remember it very well, my parents moved to a town called Efrat, which is 10 minutes really from Jerusalem. I today have a company, a startup company called Speak Up, which is a company that both does political and strategic advising and also deals with interpersonal relationships. We do public speaking sessions for people. We do private public session speaking, and we try to do some speech writing and other things. And in addition to working in Speak Up, I actually work for a newspaper, a very special one called the Jerusalem Report. I write a weekly column for them. This isn't working, by the way, but we're good without it. Oh, here it is. And I write a weekly column for them. So back to the Gaza issue. It was 1956 when Ro'i Rotenberg, who lived in Kibbutz Nachal Oz, went out of his house to plow his fields. He was what we would call the beautiful Israeli, the most wonderful product of Israeli society. A man who was only 12 years old when he volunteered to serve in Israel's independence war in 1948. He served in almost each one of Israel's wars. He plowed his field. He loved his family. In the 1950s, the Gaza Strip was controlled by Egypt. And inside there were units called the Fadayun. These were Palestinians and Egyptians that every day were trying to go into the kibbutzim in the south part of Israel, Kfar Aza, Nachal Oz, and all the kibbutzim that were standing in that area. I know, sounds familiar from the years of 2000s. Attempting to go in, murder people, destroy the fields, burn the fields. This is the 1950s, the 1956. Ro'i, who was a courageous man, hears that Palestinians came into Kibbutz Nachal Oz, and he attempts to confront them. He sees they're starting to burn the fields, and they want to enter the kibbutz and kill as many men, women, and children in that kibbutz as possible. This is Kibbutz Nachal Oz. So he confronts them. They kill him, and they drag him into the Gaza Strip, that same Gaza that defines so many of the problems that Israel is facing today. Moshe Dayan, Israel's defense minister, the famous defense minister that everybody knows for his patch on his eye, came to give a eulogy for Ro'i. And he said there a quote that defines much of what we need to ask ourselves tonight. It is not among the terrorists in Gaza, but in our midst that we must seek the blood of Ro'i. The questions of why people murder is not questions that we need to answer. Rather, we need to ask ourselves, how do we solve the problems? What do we stand for? What fights do we fight in this world of horror and terror? The answer to Ro'i's death, the answer to the Gaza complexity lays in us. But a little bit, if I may, about the history of Gaza. See, the Gaza Strip we know already from the times of the Bible. Already then, the 12 tribes of Israel had wars with the city of Ashkelon, which is now an Israeli city, and the city of Gaza that was held by the Plishtim. What's the English word for Plishtim, Mike? Do you know the Philistine? Yes, okay. All right, you got it. Yeah. We heard the Google Translate them. It's good. Already then, Gaza was a center of complexity. It's on the southern part of Israel, basically on the Mediterranean Sea, bordering both Israel and bordering Egypt from both sides. It went through many, many eras, Gaza. It was held by the British. In a sense, Gaza tells the story of the history of the land of Israel after Nebuchadnezzar sent our people to the diaspora. It was controlled by the British, it was controlled by the Muslims, it was controlled by the Turks and by the Ottomans, then it was conquered from the Egyptians. Israel retrieved it in 1967. In 1967, as other places in Israel were liberated, Gaza was liberated as well. Out of mercy to the public, the army pulled out of Gaza already in the 1960s, building a few towns that we called Gush Katif, a few towns, what is called in some of the media settlements, on the Gaza border. Gaza went through many stages with Israel. There was an attempt of the Israeli society to turn Gaza into a place where we can have relationships with. In fact, a fact that may surprise you, in the 1970s and 1980s, Gaza, which was not yet controlled by Hamas, was a city in which the elderly of the city of Sderot, on the Gaza border, remember going there to do their Friday shopping for Shabbat. It was a place where people would go to the dentists. There were workers from Gaza coming into Israel and workers from Israel entering the Gaza Strip on a daily basis. We tried to turn it this was a direct quote, into the Singapore of the Middle East. It could have been. Think about it geographically. Beautiful beaches, an area isolated from the Judea and Samaria terrorizing of the rest of the Palestinian Authority. It could have been turned into the Singapore of the Middle East. And we all know, ultimately, we believe, that there's a few elements, roots, that define all human beings. The capacity for dignity, for life, to make a living, to honor your God, to be good to your neighbor. That's what we thought. But the Kite Dilemma that I'm going to present you teaches us the opposite. Yes, my friends, unfortunately, in the Middle East, in the region that Israel is living, the one and only Jewish state, in a very complicated neighborhood, what is called the villa in the jungle, there are people who don't think the same way we do. If it was a battle of liberation, if that's what this conflict was all about, it would have been gone a long time ago. And what's my proof to you today? In 2005, the Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, tells the Israeli people a very hard message. Yes, I know Gaza belongs to us. I know you've built dreams, and I know you've built homes, and I know that this is a part of our land that we feel connected to, that defines much of our culture. But in our Jewish values, in our Jewish heritage, and in the Israel that we want to live in, we need to compromise for peace. And in that place, a concept that collapsed was brought before the Israeli people. And the concept said this: the other side is saying that they're willing to live in peace. It's only for the settlements. That's what this whole issue is about. 2.8% of Judea and Samaria and Gaza, settlers actually live in. 98% belongs to the Palestinians, but it's also 98% of the discussion of the root in the conflict in the BBC and other networks. But the Israeli people, a peace-loving people, is willing to uproot homes, uproot cemeteries and synagogues, and say, let's give peace a chance. I know that's a famous song. But that's what they said. So we uprooted it. And what happened a few months later? Was it peace? Was it the Singapore of the Middle East as was promised? We all know what happened. The Hamas, a terrorist organization with one goal: jihad and the bringing of destruction to the one and only Jewish state. A terrorist organization which covenant calls directly for the destruction of Israel. It's in back of you right now. That believes that Israel doesn't have a right not only to live in the 1967 borders, but to live in the 1948 borders or in any border. That denies the concept, the basic root that a Jew has to the land of Judah. It's that simple. You know, I read, it's kind of weird for me to go across the world and need to explain what is natural, what is 1 + 1 that equals 2. And I'll tell you why. And I wasn't good in math, but that I know. I go across the world and I need to explain my roots as a Jew in the land of Judah. You know, England, I have great respect for this country and for the people who were here. It went through a lot. There were the Romans, and then there were the Germanic tribes that came here. There were the Brits, and there were the Anglo-Saxons. And no British needs to explain to me his connection to this homeland and to the patriotic songs that are singing about this homeland. And that's only since the Roman Empire, 1,000 years old. So I need to explain a root that goes back 3,000 years? That makes no sense, but again, we live in a world of sound bites. We live in the world that unfortunately there aren't many Father Houses, there aren't many Mikes and Helens and Jill and Keeps that are willing to stand for the truth and pay a price for that. And everybody else in this great hall. So the Hamas covenant, that's the enemy in 2005 that Israel faces. And now we're faced with an enormous complexity. Okay, this is not going, so I'll just be with you. One moment. let's leave it. Okay. Okay, there we go. What is the Gaza Strip to us now? It's the same place that it was in the Bible. Honestly, it's a pain. It's a place that the Israeli people despise, not for the human beings that are living there, but because it touches everything that we don't want to deal with. We are tired of sending our brothers and sisters and losing our friends because of hatred of people who can't accept the most basic things that everybody in this room accepts. Freedom of religion, freedom at all, freedom for women, intellectual integrity. That's what we're struggling with. Not a national struggle like in Northern Ireland or in other places in the world where there's political disputes or classic religious disputes, a core belief of a people. And for that, I need to give them the respect and believe them. They'd rather starve than we open the gates and they stop shooting at us. Because shooting at us, yes, is more important, and this has been proved time and again, than living a normal life, because they have a core belief. And that core belief is that we have no right to exist. That is what the Hamas believes. The Hamas says it out loud. It's not Matan Dansker saying something. The script is in front of you. And the world, in its intellectual crisis, that can't differentiate between right and wrong, that can't differentiate between truth and false. I speak to you today not only as a believer of Israel, but as an academic, as someone who's asking this civilization to fight for the most basic things that we want as human beings. And the first one of them is human dignity for all mankind and respect to a loving God, not a God of death. And in the years after 2005, bombing, more and more bombing. And Israel bites its lips. And in 2008, we go to a military operation to try and stop it. The Hamas, they beg us to stop. Stop the firing. Let's go to a ceasefire. So what do the Israeli people do, who much rather live in peace than war? They say, again, let's give peace a chance. And we stop and we go to the ceasefire. And it's a few months of quiet. And what does the enemy do? It smuggles through Rafiah, through Egypt, bombs and missiles. And they take the cement that we pass them for humanitarian aid for one purpose only, to build more bombs and aim them into farther areas and cities inside of Israel. So then we're told, bite your lips a little more. The Turks, the Saudis, these fair negotiators, they're going to find a way to solve the situation. So 2012, another military operation. This time Israel only goes by the air. And we're sending text messages. No army in the world does that, by the way, and throws down newsletters telling people, get out of the city because we'll be bombing it tonight, and we'll be bombing areas populated by terrorists. And where are those areas? Sheba Hospital, a hospital that I as a soldier was next to, where I literally saw bombs inside of them. And why does the enemy do that? What are they testing? And you need to trust them. They know the Israeli society, just like Nasrallah. They're testing the Kite Dilemma. And they did that also in 2014 in Operation Protective Edge, where they kidnapped our teenagers and we went into yet another military operation. They realize a truth that I want you to know about Israel. Don't only understand Israel by its decisions. Understand Israel by its arguments. Since the declaration of Zionism, since the Jewish national liberation movement, Israel has been terrorized. They have been struck by enemies from all corners of the state of Israel and by land. They were almost destroyed in 1973. We were almost destroyed in 1948, where 10% of our population was destroyed in the war of liberation, where Holocaust survivors coming from the ashes take weapons and guns and protect the one and only Jewish homeland that is a promise for the generations to come. And what are they testing? They know that it doesn't only pain us to lose our own children. It hurts us that we need to hurt theirs. And they know that. When they put that missile in the hospital or in the private home, they're doing that because they understand Israel. They understand what it's all about. What society, after 100 years of terrorism, would argue and debate for months and months and years? Since 2005, the debate is going on. Is this a disproportionate attack? Is it a not disproportionate attack? Is it too much? And I'm not criticizing the debate. I am proud of the debate because that debate is Israel. It's a debate of dignity for human beings. It's the debate of sanctifying life. A terrorist was shot in the city of Hebron. The Israeli society goes through months and months debating, was the soldier right to shoot the terrorist when he was laying on the ground? As a former soldier, I have to tell you, I think he was wrong. But that's contrary to the point. The point is, look at a society that's being claimed by the BBC and by the UN to be corrupted, that after 100 years of being terrorized, 70 since its declaration, did not lose its moral compass. Because the Kite Dilemma means that yes, we have the challenge of protecting our citizens, but we have to also maintain our values, because if we lose our values, if we do the same thing that the enemy does, we give them a double victory. And we can't let that happen. I personally struggle with some things that Israel has to do. I believe Israel has to do them, but I struggle with it. And if I wasn't struggling with it, I wouldn't be a proud Israeli. If I wasn't struggling with the pain and suffering that there is in the other side, that's being terrorized by a corrupt, as Mike said today, by a corrupt political leadership that has taken its money from the citizens, has taken the tax money and shoving it to terrorism and to expensive houses while the people are in poverty. That's what we're facing. And when you try to explain to the world what we're facing, it's hard because the world wants a soundbite. They see a tank and they see a demonstrator and they think that tells a story. But it tells nothing about the story, because you cannot understand the story of what Israel deals with. No one in the world can understand it without reading what's in back of you, with believing what the enemy says. I believe them. One of the things that people believe is that the story of Israel only has to do with us. They're talking about a struggle that there is in the world, a cultural struggle. They call it radical Islamic terrorists. And they're giving explanation. There's terrorism in Madrid, there's terrorism in London, there's terrorism in New York, and that is horrifying. But when it comes to Israel, the terrorism gets a political excuse. Suddenly, it's not black and white that killing women and children is bad. Suddenly, it's put in a context of a political disagreement, as if Israel, that represents a people, a Jewish society that has been persecuted more than all in history. Did you ever see a Jew bomb a German restaurant? Did you ever see a Jew after the 12th century, when Jews were deported out of England, return back and revenge that? No. We went and we created a state. We rewrote texts. We rethought the Jewish problem, and we came to a conclusion that the only way to revive and maintain our culture, our mutual culture that has brought so much to the world, is by having a one and only Jewish state in the ancestral homeland. So terrorism, when it happens in New York and London, and I agree, is horrifying. But when it happens in Israel, if it only wasn't for the settlements, the 2.8% of Jews living by the way, and what represents a lot of our history. Believe me, Judah and Samaria and Shiloh and Bethel were part of the Jewish culture much before the Romans decided to call Palestine, Palestine, and the British gave it a mandate. But this dilemma happening in Israel is not just mine. It's not just ours. We're just on the front line. Because from Wales, England, to Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Beersheba, Sderot, Yerucham, there's a common struggle going on. It's all of our struggle. The Kite Dilemma is coming to a field next to you. It's already begun. And it's not about a certain religion. I don't despise any minority. I am a patriotic Israeli, but I respect all the citizens of Israel. I even have respect for my enemy. That's what I was taught from day one in the military. But people need to understand that the moral crisis is not just wrong, false, and sometimes stupid, forgive me for the word. The moral crisis is dangerous. It's dangerous for the civilization that we cherish, that we love so much. And what do you do? Because we had 2008 and 2012 and 2014, so we go in and we lost close to 70 soldiers in Operation Protective Edge, including some of my best friends, and we go into the battlefield and we stop the tunnels. Then it was the tunnels, and we go out. Maybe now, after we've given them such a punch, maybe now it will end. And what happens? What happens to people that truly believe in your destruction? They'll never give up. Even if 60% are under poverty, they will never give up. So now it's kites, and now it's balloons. And what is the Israeli army faced with? Kites, by the way, that if you'll see the details, kites that have brought enormous destruction, burning of fields all across Israel. They have burned dunams and dunams and dunams of all the kibbutzim that are in the south. They have fired 200 rockets. And what does Israel do? What do you do when you're facing children with kites? Are you going to bring an F-18 and throw a bomb on them? By the way, some people say in order to protect your citizens, that's the moral thing to do. But the biggest sin, the biggest thing, the thing that makes me most angry is that they would put a society, a culture, a Jewish culture that cherishes life and put them in front of that dilemma. So now it's kites. And what is the enemy trying to do? Ultimately, what is the Hamas trying to do to us? See, since 1973, Israel didn't go through a survival war. 1973 was the last time that our enemies had the capacity to destroy us completely. By the grace of God and by the heroics of our military, we were able to stop them in all fronts. We stopped them on the Syrian borders in the Golan Heights in a miraculous battle where we lost close to 2,000 Israeli soldiers. And in the south side of Israel on the Egyptian border, led by Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, we were able to stop them in the Suez Canal. So what does the enemy do when it realizes it can't destroy you anymore? It learns your society. It learns your culture. It studies your every movement. And it tries to break your soul. It tries to mentally wear you out. It tries to make the Israeli people so frustrated of sending our young men and women into the battlefield because, believe me, we would much rather continue making startups that have brought water to China and India and Burma, by the way, and have helped agriculture in Africa than fight wars. And they understand that. And they are trying to break our society mentally because they can't break it physically. And a new generation of Israelis, I'm proud to be one of them, has to rise up and reclaim the conclusion that was brought to Herzl 100 years ago in Europe after 2,000 years of persecution. There is one solution to reclaiming the Jewish culture and maintaining it. There is one solution for protecting values that we share together, those same values, and it doesn't matter if it's from the book of Paul or if it's from the book of Jeremiah, all of them were centered in Jerusalem. Those same values that we both share. A new generation of Israelis can't break because of the kites and reclaim the word of Herzl and reclaim the word of Jabotinsky and the Zionist leaders that said there is one way to maintain, revive our language, revive our culture, which lands in Scripture. to have in your ancestral homeland a Jewish, free, democratic state. But it's hard, and it's tough. And I ask myself today, after visiting the South before I came here, I wanted to get a bit of a feel. I wanted to hug my brothers and sisters in the sovereign area of Israel. I wanted to get a touch of what they're going through. And I want to come home to them with strength. And I see it here. See, I believe ultimately we're all fragments of history. It says in the scripture, from dust we came, and to dust we shall return. All that matters on this earth is the decisions, the moral decisions that we made in our lives. Even if the BBC gets 90% rating and the Father's house gets 90 people, that doesn't matter. It's each and every one of us decision. When he'll tell his grandchild, or when he'll come up to the next world and when he'll talk to God, where were you when there was a battle for civilization? What value did you approach? What opinion did you take? What struggle did you fight? And that is your struggle here. I know many of you are being criticized for your love for Israel. I admire your courage. And I want to tell you it has an effect. And that's not only a metaphor. Israel is an amazing country to live in. We cannot define the identity of Israel only through death and war, because the truth of the matter is, many of you have been there, it is an incredible country. The smell of Jerusalem on Friday night, the views of the beach in Tel Aviv, that same old Hebrew language that we love to argue with and yell with and read scripture with, that same old language that we were the only national movement in history to revive its language. It's a common language to all of us. And Israel is incredible, and I don't need to tell you that. But it has a toll when Gentiles and Jews across the world struggle for the state of Israel, not only because you're making a moral opinion and you're standing on what's true. You're doing something else. See, when the embassy moved to Jerusalem and the nations of the world finally accepted what was known and obvious, that Jerusalem is the capital, is the center of the Jewish people throughout its history. What was the and here I'm talking to you as a political analyst. What was the political reason that it moved? And let me tell you something to all who think that what you're doing here doesn't have an effect. See, all across America, just like there are in England, there were Gentiles, Christian believers, Zionist Christian believers who believe in the right of the Jewish people to have a state of their own. And those people, they were the political influence for the movement of the embassy to Jerusalem. That historic move did not happen because of years of Jewish lobbying in America. It happened because of Christian in swing states in America. This is the honest truth. It's mathematical. Who were saying to the president, move that embassy to Jerusalem. That is what needs to start here, and in places like this. And it's worth it to me to lose any hour of work to come here and tell you this. This is where the movement begins. I know that when I'm 40 years old, if God lets me to get to those days, doesn't always happen in Israel. So if God gives me the opportunity, we're not into black humor here. That's not our thing. Okay. I need to know my crowd. Yeah. If God gives me the capacity, and when I'm 40 and I'll visit the Father's house and there'll be already thousands of people here, that movement, not only for Israel, that movement for our common values will make a difference in this world. Because remember that Kite Dilemma. That dilemma that starts in Gaza and has been in Gaza since the time of the Bible, but ends and continues in Europe and in other places of the world. I'm proud to be in a weekend, in a gathering, to run with people that are on the right side of history, with people that are on the right side of the border on the Golan Heights, where right now Israeli soldiers are treating wounded Syrians. These are Syrians that for years were our fearless enemies. They are treating them now because of a core belief that starts in the Bible and continues in the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel and is being spoken about in the Father's house in Wales, that freedom, love for every human being, love for your neighbor, and the belief in a loving God and not in God of hate is the right approach. And that approach, your approach, is being represented in Israel. So we are your ambassadors, and thank you very, very much from the bottom of my heart for being our ambassadors. And I know it strengthens the people in the South that are continuing to be in this complicated arena. You have a lot to do. We have a lot to do, and that by the grace of God, we'll get the job done, and the state of Israel will live forever again. Thank you. Thank you.